The Desire of Ages, chapter 77, in Pilate's Judgment Hall. This chapter is based on Matthew 27:2, 11-31, Mark 15, 1-20, Luke 23, 1-25, John 18, 28-40, John 19, 1-16. Pilate was not a just or a conscientious judge, but weak though he was in moral power, he refused to grant this request. He would not condemn Jesus until a charge had been brought against him. The priests were in a dilemma. They saw that they must cloak their hypocrisy under the thickest concealment. They must not allow it to appear that Christ had been arrested on religious grounds. Were this put forward as a reason, their proceedings would have no weight with Pilate. They must make it appear that Jesus was working against the common law. Then he could be punished as a political offender. Tumults and insurrection against the Roman government were constantly arising among the Jews. With these revolts, the Romans had dealt very rigorously, and they were constantly on the watch to repress everything that could lead to an outbreak. Only a few days before this, the Pharisees had tried to entrap Christ with the question, "Is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar?" But Christ had unveiled their hypocrisy. The Romans who were present had seen the utter failure of the plotters, and their discomfiture at his answer, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which be Caesar's." Luke 20, 22-25. Now the priests thought to make it appear that on this occasion Christ had taught what they hoped he would teach. In their extremity they called false witnesses to their aid, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation, and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ a king." 3 charges, each without foundation. The priests knew this, but they were willing to commit perjury could they but secure their end. Pilate saw through their purpose. He did not believe that the prisoner had plotted against the government. His meek and humble appearance was altogether out of harmony with the charge. Pilate was convinced that a deep plot had been laid to destroy an innocent man who stood in the way of the Jewish dignitaries. Turning to Jesus, he asked, "Art thou the King of the Jews?" The Saviour answered, "Thou sayest it." And as he spoke, his countenance lighted up as if a sunbeam was shining upon it. When they heard his answer, Caiaphas and those that were with him called Pilate to witness that Jesus had admitted the crime with which he was charged. With noisy cries, priests, scribes, and rulers demanded that he be sentenced to death. The cries were taken up by the mob, and the uproar was deafening. Pilate was confused. Seeing that Jesus made no answer to his accusers, Pilate said to him, "Answerest thou nothing? Behold how many things they witness against thee." But Jesus yet answered nothing. Standing behind Pilate in view of all in the court, Christ heard the abuse, but to all the false charges against him he answered not a word. His whole bearing gave evidence of conscious innocence. He stood unmoved by the fury of the waves that beat about him. It was as if the heavy surges of wrath, rising higher and higher like the waves of the boisterous ocean, broke about him, but did not touch him. He stood silent, but his silence was eloquence. It was as a light shining from the inner to the outer man. What are the lessons, inspirations, and applications that can be taken from this story? The story shows us that hypocrisy, no matter how carefully disguised, cannot stand before the truth of Christ. That moral weakness, like Pilate's failure to stand for justice, often leads to compromise and injustice. That Jesus' calm silence in the face of false accusations revealed strength, dignity, and trust in his Father, reminding us that silence can sometimes speak louder than words, and that his demeanor under abuse reflected his purity and divine authority, teaching us that true character shines brightest in trials. Jesus inspires us to face trials without bitterness, showing us that quiet strength and grace are more powerful than retaliation. His life reminds us that God's truth does not need force to defend it, for it shines on its own. Even when surrounded by hatred and falsehood, his light broke through, assuring us that God's presence gives courage and peace, and his example calls us to stand for righteousness, even if it means standing alone. In our daily lives, we are called to stand firm in integrity, praying for courage to hold to the truth, even when it is unpopular, to avoid hypocrisy by being honest before God and others rather than masking selfish motives with outward religiosity, to practice Christ-like silence when falsely accused or criticized, remembering that a calm and composed spirit often reveals more of Christ than heated arguments, and to reflect his character so that just as his demeanor shone in the judgment hall, our attitudes in trials may testify of God's grace to those around us.